The Wooing of Leola by Mrs. Alex McVeigh Miller. Copyright 1905 and 1906 by F. M. Lupton. Now in the public domain. Chapter 1. Some Pretty Pictures. Oh, Mamma, I have had a lovely time at Mrs. Van Bibber's. I would not have missed her reception for the world. The blonde beauty threw herself with a silken frou-frou of rich attire back into a luxurious chair, clasped her white jeweled hands, and rolled her large bluebell eyes heavenward, practicing the seraphic expression she found so effective with the men. She repeated rapturously, "I would not have missed it for the world. Everything was on the grandest scale and went off beautifully. I felt that it was worth all our scheming and planning for my lovely gown." And she smiled complacently at her rich blue silk robe loaded with fine lace trimmings that set off so well her blue eyes and fluffy flaxen hair. "But, Mamma," she continued, "how sober you look. Is your rheumatism worse, poor dear?" The faded elderly woman, with the careworn face and fretful mouth, clasped her thin white hands nervously over her knee and answered wearily, "My rheumatism is bad enough, but what worries me most is that I made such a mistake, pawning my diamonds for that splendid gown when you might have done better remaining at home without it." "Mamma, what can you mean?" And Jessie Sterling frowned impatiently, tearing a white rose to pieces with excited fingers. "I mean that, after all my sacrifices to get you ready for Mrs. Van Bibber's reception, hoping you might meet Chester Oliphant there and make up your quarrel, he came here to call on you in your absence." "And I missed him like that! Oh, what a shame! But who could have dreamed he would miss the reception? Still, Mamma, you should have kept him till I returned. Oh, why did you let him get away?" queried the girl angrily. "How could I help it, my dear? You know very well I would have been willing to chain him to his chair to keep him here till you came. I did my best, made talk and tried to hold him, but after an hour he pleaded an engagement and hurried away." "But he will come again. Surely he will. Of course you asked. Made him promise?" cried Jessie wildly. "Yes, oh yes, but he did not say he would. He only came, he said, to return some negatives you loaned him to make pictures from, the ones you took with your own camera in the mountains last summer." "Oh yes, I remember. Uncle Herman's picturesque old stone mansion and some mountains and river views taken from the bridge at Alderson." "Yes, and some pictures too of that hoydenish girl Leola. I wish you had left those out, Jessie." "Why, really, Mamma, I forgot they were in the negative book, for I didn't mean to show them to Chester. Not that I could be jealous of a wild thing like Leola Mead, but because I promised her no one should see them. There was that one of her wading in the creek, you know, and another in Bloomer sitting astride her white pony Rex, and another in hunting costume, rifle on her shoulder. Really, she wasn't pretty in any of the negatives, except her white evening gown with the lilies on her shoulder." "Yes, he said that was lovely, and the others too, and he asked no end of questions about her and where she lived. He pretended to be anxious to see the scenery, but I guess it was Leola more than anything else. Men are so sly." "And you, Mamma, what did you tell him?" Jessie asked anxiously. "Oh, I told him we should be glad to have him visit Wheatland sometime when we were there with my half-brother. But I made up my mind he should never go there till you were safely his wife." "Good, Mamma, though really I cannot look upon Leola Mead seriously as a rival. Why, she is only a simple country girl, with no style or good clothes at all." "But dangerously pretty, Jessie. Don't forget that. And as for style, well, she is graceful and dashing as any girl I ever saw, and there's no telling what might happen if they met. Anyhow, he just plied me with eager questions about the girl, and I could see he was almost fascinated by her pictures. Of course I did not encourage him any. I said she was my half-brother's ward, and presumably of low origin, as he was reticent about her birth, and said she had not a friend in the world but himself. I enlarged on her rude manners and hoydenish ways, and said she was not nearly as pretty as the pictures. "In reality she is 10 times prettier," laughed Jessie. "So you are right. He must never see Leola meet until I am his wife. I shall write him a sweet little note, pretending he has lost one of the negatives, and ask him to call again." "I do not believe he will, for he evaded the question when I urged him to do so. Indeed, I even hinted how sorry you were over the quarrel, and he said, quite amiably, that it was all past now, and he hoped you and he might be good friends again." "Friends? Bah! He shall be my husband yet. I will win him back again. His millions shall not slip through my fingers this time, I promise you, Mamma, and woe to any girl that dares try to rival me. But really, I am not jealous of anybody, for I think I see his little game. He wants to make up, or he would not have come. It was easy enough to return the pictures by mail now, wasn't it? But he probably came because he wanted to see me, and that chat about Leola was only to make me uneasy and jealous, don't you see?" "I hope so, dear, but really I was quite frightened the way he talked of the lovely pictures he had made from the negatives." "Lovely nonsense!" Jessie cried sharply, with an angry gleam of her blue eyes and a vicious snap of her white teeth as she added, "I believe I would try to murder Leola if she came between us, for I cannot believe his love for me is dead so soon. If it is, I'll soon warm over the old coals again. I'll write him a note right away, saying how sorry I am that I was out this afternoon, and asking him to come this evening or tomorrow." "Pray do so," cried the scheming mother, whose small means were dwindling away so fast in the effort to keep afloat in fashionable society till her daughter's beauty won a rich husband. Jessie wrote and dispatched her pleading note before she removed the dainty hat from her fluffy blonde hair, and when evening came she was waiting for him, gowned in dainty white, befitting the warm June weather. To her amazement and anger there was no reply, and the next morning she read, in the society columns of her favorite daily, that Chester Oliphant had left New York the previous evening on a yachting trip with several other young men, and would be absent 2 weeks. "Well, thank heaven, there are only men in the party, so he will not be exposed to any other girl's fascinations on the trip, and I'll be waiting for him when he comes back," cried Jessie, swallowing her chagrin the best she could. To the back of her mettlesome pony, and almost flew down the mountain road, her great dark eyes flashing with anger, her cheeks glowing crimson, her wealth of golden locks streaming like a ruddy banner on the breeze. Against the tight bodice of her riding habit, her young bosom heaved tumultuously with the angry throbs of her heart, for Leola had just had a bitter quarrel with her guardian, and now gave vent to her excitement by giving free rein to Rex in a breakneck ride. All nature at her sweetest and fairest, and Leola had been planning such a happy, happy day. But when she came out from breakfast ready for her morning canter, there stood her saturnine old guardian, asking her to step into the library for a moment before she rode away. Leola obeyed him, pouting, for she hated to lose time indoors this gladsome golden day. There was no love lost between her and her grim guardian anyway, for he was a stern old man, reticent and mysterious, spending most of his time in a horrid laboratory up in the tower chamber of the rough old stone house, where the country folk said he was working either to wrest from nature the secret of making gold, or the still greater mystery of distilling a magic elixir of life. About the neighborhood he got the sobriquet, Wizard Herman, and looked the character with his lean, stooping form, long black hair floating over his coat collar, strongly marked features, and cunning mouth, while his keen gray eyes, under bushy brows, seemed to pierce one through with their questioning gaze. His ancestors had been pioneer Indian fighters, and the large house built of rough stone, just as taken from the quarry, dated back to the time when the native men roamed the almost unbroken forest. In all the years while Leola had lived here with her governess in the lonely old house, she could not remember a caress from the mysterious, self-absorbed old man who seemed to have no human interests or passions and to care for no one but the dwarfish servitor who helped him in his laboratory, the only person he ever admitted within its precincts. It was no wonder, then, that Leola followed Wizard Herman unwillingly into the musty-smelling library, with its high walnut waistcot, dingy green-stenciled walls, and side shelves lined with old leather volumes, while the bare oaken floor on which she trod was worn with the footsteps of successive generations who had passed from earth in the fullness of time and been gathered to their fathers. In the sombre room with its closed shutters, Leola stood facing her grim guardian with the impatient air of some beautiful young princess giving audience to a vassal. As he stood hesitating where to begin, with an unwonted diffidence, she said coldly, "Speak. Tell me your wish at once, sir, for I must hurry. I have an engagement in town with my dressmaker." At those words, Wizard Herman's gloomy brow cleared as if by magic, and quickly striking his lean, scarred hands together, he retorted maliciously, "An engagement with your dressmaker, eh, my proud lady? Very well. While you are there, you may give the woman an order for your wedding gown." "Sir!" she uttered in amazement, her cheeks reddening. Wizard Herman retorted with a hoarse, sardonic laugh. "I said give the woman an order for your wedding gown, Leola Mead, for you are to be married soon." Leola stared speechlessly a moment, wondering if the old man was losing his mind, and, taking advantage of her silence, he continued with forced bravado. "You look surprised, my haughty young lady, so I will explain. I have accepted a desirable proposal for your hand, and as you are plenty old enough to marry, 19 your last birthday, I have named the wedding for a month from today." Leola, recovering her speech, cried indignantly, "Quite a cool proceeding on your part, sir, I must say, but I wish you to understand that I am not ready to marry yet." "That makes no difference to me, for you will have to obey me, Leola Mead. Understand that," he replied with rising anger. "You are my ward, and in pursuance of my duty to you, I have accepted a man for your husband who worships the ground you walk upon, and will spend money on you like water." Leola's dark eyes blazed with indignation. "You must surely be mad," she cried passionately. "The man I would choose for my husband must ask me for my hand, not you, sir. This is free America, you must remember, not France, where marriages are arranged by old people who have forgotten love and youth. I refuse the suitor you have chosen for me without even hearing his name." The old man muttered sullenly, "Marriage is the destiny of all young girls. You would not wish to grow into a sour old maid." "No, I do not intend to be an old maid, sir, but," with a proud toss of her lovely head, "when I marry I shall choose the man myself, and it shall be for love, not money." "Money is the only thing worth having. Money and long life," he muttered, but Leola, with a contemptuous laugh, turned to go. He sprang between her and the door, putting his back against it. "I have not done telling you all about this matter yet," he exclaimed, but Leola stamped her little foot in fury, replying, "I will not hear another word, I tell you, and you may as well let me go and give up your foolish plans." "By heaven, miss, you shall marry the man of my choice, I swear it," cried the wizard violently, but she answered coldly, "Pray let me hear no more such nonsense, Uncle Herman. Granted you are my guardian, the law does not give you the power of marrying me to anyone against my will. No, not another word, or I shall think you are going insane, if not so already. Get away from that door and let me out, or I shall scream for assistance or jump out of the window." "You would not dare do either," he said. Leola ran like a flash to the window, pushing back the creaking shutters, letting in a flood of June sunshine. The next moment she sprang to the high sill, crying defiantly, "Now, get away from that door, or I will jump out." The old man muttered incredulously, "You would break your neck." Leola answered recklessly, I shall risk that unless you let me out of the door. Come now, I will count 10. If you do not move before then, I am gone." And drawing her dainty little feet up into the window, and dangling them on the outside, she began counting in a clear, high voice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Wizard Herman remained standing with his back toward the door, regarding her with an incredulous leer, never dreaming she would make the foolhardy leap, for from the window-sill it was 20 feet to the ground. But Leola was as good as her word. While she counted, she kept her flashing dark eyes full upon his stubborn face, and seeing that he did not move as the last word left her lips, she deliberately turned and sprang out upon the ground. A cry of alarm shrilled over the old man's lips, and he stood like one rooted to the spot, listening for the cry of pain that must announce the dread result of the perilous leap. Visions of Leola, crippled or dead, floated before his mind's eye, and he muttered savagely, "Little vixen, if you have broken your neck it is your own fault, but if you live you shall marry the man of my choice 1 month from today, I swear it." The sound of her voice floated to him indistinctly. Was it a laugh or a groan? He hurried to the window, shaking with excitement. There was Leola standing upright on the greensward, brushing her blue skirt and humming a little song to herself. "Are you hurt?" he quavered anxiously, and she looked up, laughing maliciously. "Hurt? Oh, no, not a bit," she called back gaily. "I just let myself go limply, and I came down like a cat on all fours in the grass and clover. I have fallen higher than that from trees many a time without hurting myself. It's easy enough when you learn to go limp and not stiffen yourself. Ha ha!" As he glared in amazement, she waved her hand audaciously and added, "You ought to try it yourself sometime, Uncle Herman. Well, goodbye, sir, and mind you don't let me hear any more of this matchmaking business unless you go and get married yourself." And with that parting shot, the merry girl ran across the grass, a vision of youth and health and beauty, to where her pony was waiting, ready saddled beneath a tree. Vaulting lightly to his back, without even waiting to fasten the loosened tresses of her ruddy hair, the wild young thing was off and away down the mountain road, her young bosom throbbing tumultuously, half with anger, half with mirth, at the rencontre with her guardian. "The old silly, to think of marrying me off without so much as a by your leave! The idea!" she exclaimed aloud, adding more soberly, "Not that I'd mind having a rich husband if he was handsome and winning too. But how often I have heard it said that good looks and riches seldom go together, so if that's the case I'd marry for love and let money go." Her fit of anger dissolving in the sunshine of sweet good nature, she hummed as she galloped on, a fragment of a tender little love song, sweet as it was sad. "Honey flowers for the honeycomb, and the honey bees from home. A honeycomb and a honey flower, and the bee shall have his hour. A honeyed heart for the honeycomb, and the humming bee flies home. A heavy heart in the honey flower, and the bee has had his hour." Suddenly the low song died on her lips, changing to a cry of alarm. At a curve in the road she came suddenly upon a startling sight. Rex just swerved aside from a runaway horse that was dragging behind it a shattered little runabout, in which stood upright a white-faced man, straining desperately upon the reins, trying to stop the maddened animal's wild career. Even in that terrible moment, with the black horse plunging madly forward to the imminent peril of the driver's life, Leola saw, as by a flash, that the man was young and very, very handsome, and her heart throbbed with wild pain at his danger, for on one side the road sloped precipitously downward to a dangerous stream of water, and a plunge over that steep incline meant death in horrible form. But what could avert the catastrophe? For it seemed as if nothing could restrain the plunging brute, or turn aside his maddened course toward the crumbling edge of the yawning precipice that would instantly engulf both in ruin and death. A cry of agony, "Oh, God, save him!" shrilled over her rosy lips. Surely the listening angels heard the prayer, for suddenly she saw that there was one chance in 1,000 to avert the threatening disaster, one chance, though with deadly peril to herself. With a high heart of hope and a courage that defied all the deadly risk, she dared the consequences, spurring Rex forward in front of the black horse with a clarion call on her lips that wrought what seemed like a miracle. For at her voice, conjoined with the startled whinny from Rex, the terrified animal, plunging and rearing but an instant before, with upraised hoofs nearing the verge of the dangerous precipice, now stopped as if shot, trembling all over, while Leola, throwing out her arms, caught his neck and clung with the energy of despair. Chapter 3. Are You an Angel? What subtle influence wrought the miracle, for it could not have been the strength of Leola's slender hands? But there stood the satanic black animal, its fury abated, its flight arrested, its huge form trembling, shuddering, while the foamy sweat dropped in streams to the ground. As for the driver, he had been hurled violently backward into the road by the impetus of the sudden stop, and now lay there without sound or motion, like a dead man. Leola, waiting only a moment to pat the black horse gently on his heaving neck, slipped from her saddle and ran to the young man, leaving, oh wonder of wonders, the excited creature standing stock still and rubbing noses with Rex quite as if they had been old friends. "Oh, heaven! He is dead!" the girl moaned in anguish. Her heart sank like lead to see him lying there so still, with a little stream of blood trickling from his temple where it had struck against a jagged rock. "Oh, if I only had some water!" she sighed, and just then the trickle of a little spring by the side of the road caught her ears. She ran and filled her riding cap with the clear fluid and dashed it in his face. Oh, joy! He gasped once or twice and opened on her anxious face a pair of the bonniest dark blue eyes she had ever met, eyes that seemed to go exactly with the glossy curls of thick brown hair. When his gaze met hers, he smiled faintly and sighed. Where am I? Oh, I remember now. I was in an accident. My horse ran away and I was thrown out of the runabout. Was I killed? Is this heaven, and are you my angel?" Leola laughed a happy, rippling laugh, sweet as music to his ears. "An angel? No, indeed," she cried. "And this is not heaven either, only a rough, rocky road where you fell when you pitched out of your trap. Oh, are you hurt very bad? Does your poor head pain you very much?" Their faces were very close together, for she had pillowed his head on her tender arm, and he could feel the quick throbs of her excited heart as she waited for his answer. I do not feel very bad," he began, then suddenly lapsed into unconsciousness again, and this time it seemed to her that he was surely gone forever. Tears started in her eyes and fell in a burning shower upon his pallid, handsome face, mingling with the crimson rain that ran down his cheek. Again he revived, and looking up, met that tender, tearful glance of Leola's lovely eyes that made the blood leap through his veins with rapture. He said faintly, "Do not say you are not an angel, for I shall always think of you as one sweet girl. Ah, I remember all now. My runaway horse was going straight over the declivity when you spurred yours between and caught his neck in your arms. It was a magnificent thing to do, but a perilous one, too, to risk your life for an utter stranger." Leola smiled brightly and answered, "It certainly looked like taking a terrible risk, and would scarcely have succeeded so well but for one fact quite unknown to you." "And that?" he queried eagerly, and she replied, "You see, I recognized in your satanic steed a favorite of mine, a spirited creature that I loved dearly when it belonged to my guardian, who sold it to the livery stable in town only a week ago. Black Hawk, as we called him, was an elder brother to my pony Rex, and they were fond of each other. So, you see, it was really our acquaintance with Black Hawk that made him so easy to subdue. Just turn your head now, sir, and you will see the pair biting at each other in the most affectionate manner."
"It is wonderful," he murmured. "But all the same, I owe you my life, for you ran a terrible risk trusting to Black Hawk's possible obedience to you. What if, in his fury of fear and rage, for he had taken desperate fright at a well-digging machine in a field, he had proved unmanageable? You and I must have gone down to death together, all in one tragic moment."
"It is true, but let us not think of that, since the danger is past," said Leola, making light of it and adding, "What troubles me now is how to get assistance for you. I don't like to leave you alone, but I hear wheels. Someone is coming." Sure enough, an old top buggy drawn by an old gray mare came clattering around the curve of the road, and in it sat the one person most welcome of anyone in the world just now, the village doctor. "Oh, Dr. Barnes, how glad I am to see you! You see, there's been an accident," Leola cried eagerly as he drew rein and began to jump nimbly out.
"Yes, my dear, I saw the accident from up on the hill just as I was coming out from a patient's house, and I got to you as fast as old Dolly would travel. Really, it was a splendid deed of daring," cried the middle-aged doctor, patting her bright head in a fatherly way as he stooped over the young man. "Ah, a stranger," he continued. "Well, how much is he hurt? Cut on the temple, eh? Needs some stitches. Any bones broken, do you think? Wait till I stanch and bind the wound, and then we will see." This accomplished, he tendered the use of his arm, and the young fellow got upon his feet without much difficulty. "Ah, you're all right, unless there's some internal hurt. Come, I will put you into my buggy. Your arm on the other side. Leola and I must take you to the nearest house, which happens to be the Widow Gray's cottage, below here. There I can sew up your wound and leave you in safe hands till we can find out if there's any internal injuries. All right, put your head back against the lap-robe. You will come with us, Leola. I may need your help." Stranger as the young man was, they could not have taken him to a better place, for Widow Gray was the dearest old woman in the neighborhood. She lived quite alone in a tidy cottage back among a grove of maples, or a sugar camp, as the country people called it. For here in the early spring was always produced that toothsome dainty, maple sugar, so dear to the hearts of school children. The widow had a neat spare room that she often let to a summer boarder, and to this white-hung chamber she quickly led Dr. Barnes with his patient, her round face beaming with good nature as she promised to do all she could for the unfortunate young stranger. "He will need your best nursing, I fear," exclaimed Dr. Barnes, for on getting his patient down upon the bed, he immediately fainted again, and the swoon was so deep that it was difficult to revive him. "Oh, he is dead!" sobbed Leola, and the thought carried with it such agony that it changed and darkened the whole world to her young heart. So dear had the handsome stranger grown already. Chapter 4. Beware of Jealousy. How glad she was when he opened his eyes again and faltered, "I am quite ashamed of myself, fainting away like a weak woman. I will promise not to do so again, doctor." Dr. Barnes quickly made him as easy as possible and left him to the widow's care, promising to call again that evening to see how he fared, and also to send word to the livery stable about the horse and trap. Leola felt she had no further excuse for staying, although, somehow, she could not bear to go. She went into the room to say farewell, and he entreated her to stay in a weak voice, reinforced by pleading eyes. She smiled and shook her head. "It is better I should go now, for the doctor says you must have absolute rest and quiet today, and I am a sad chatterbox, but I will come tomorrow and bring you some flowers," she promised. She pressed his hand in mute farewell, and the contact thrilled her with rapturous emotion, for even with his pallor and his bandaged head he appeared to her a king among men, a veritable Prince Charming. A great change had come to her heart since she rode out so blithely that morning, and the words of her simple song were coming true. "A honeycomb and a honeyflower, and the bee shall have his hour." She forgot all about her errand to town, and remounting Rex, went for a long ride miles away to a beautiful blue sulphur spring, where she lingered for hours upon the green lawn, dreaming over and over the startling event of the day, and gazing anon into the sparkling depths of the water, as if she might read in its pellucid depths the secret of her future. And she recalled, with a sudden thrill, the gypsy who had told her fortune last year, saying, "You will have a handsome blue-eyed husband, and you will adore each other. But beware of jealousy, or it will part you forever." Leola had laughed at the gypsy then, but now she recalled her prophecy with a prophetic thrill. "A handsome blue-eyed husband! He has blue eyes," she said, which showed that her thoughts already reached toward the unknown future. Our feelings and our thoughts tend ever on and rest not in the present. When she returned home, she had temporarily forgotten all about her little tiff with Wizard Herman that morning, and as she saw him nowhere about, it did not occur to her mind. She avoided every one, which was not hard to do. The household consisting of only 5 members, her guardian and self, her former governess, who now combined teaching and housekeeping by way of economy, a fat black cook, and a man of all work, a misshapen dwarfish creature of tremendous strength. The day and night seemed interminably long to Leola, who lay awake many hours through pure joy of this blissful something that had come so suddenly into the placid current of her young life. Heaven forfend her from ever knowing the wakefulness of sorrow. Bright and early the next morning she was out in the old-fashioned garden, gathering roses, dewy, sweet, and lovely, and it was not difficult to coax the cook Betsy for a bit of early breakfast before the others appeared. Then, because she did not want to seem too anxious, Leola walked the 2 miles to Widow Gray's cottage. When Wizard Herman asked at breakfast after the truant, Betsy, who was bringing in the toast, answered that young miss had gone to carry some flowers to a sick friend. "Humph!" was his careless rejoinder, little dreaming that the sick friend was a charming young man who had already carried Leola's heart by storm. Meanwhile the young girl went blithely on her way, glad at heart with a strange new emotion, yet not realizing why the world seemed so much sweeter than yesterday, the flowers fairer, the skies brighter, and all nature attuned to a diviner melody. Even her own rare beauty had gained another indefinable charm from the vibrations of love pulsing joyfully through all her frame. She knew that she was drawn by invisible cords to the handsome stranger, but she imputed it to keen interest in one she had saved from death. Widow Gray welcomed her with beaming smiles. "Oh, Miss Mead, such a rapid improvement you never saw in your life. Why, after he had rested all day and night, he was like another man, and the doctor let him dress this morning and lie on the lounge in his room. He says he has no internal trouble at all, and need only stay in a few days till his head gets well. Wasn't he lucky? For the doctor says the tumble might have killed him, and that it was a miracle it didn't. But laws, he's as right as a trivet, and has taken a poached egg and bit of toast this morning. What sweet, sweet flowers! Come right in, do, and see him. He's expecting you." How his blue eyes beamed as she entered with the flowers. Leola would never forget that look to her dying day. "You are come at last," he cried happily. "I have been hoping and watching for you more than an hour. I should have been in a fever of impatience if you had stayed away much longer." "And yet it is quite early. See, the dew is not yet dry on the roses I brought you," smiled Leola, as she drew a chair close to his side. "Are you not glad I escaped with so slight injury?" he exclaimed joyously. "And only to think that I owe my life to you. How can I repay you but by devoting it to your service?" This was very rapid love-making indeed. Leola, with her very limited experience that way, felt it was so, yet somehow she could not chide him. Her heart beat very fast, her cheeks flamed crimson, and when she tried to look away from him she could not help his gaze from holding hers in a long look into her soul that was trying to hide from him beneath her dark curling lashes. In that moment of pure rapture, Sir Cupid transfixed both their hearts with his cunning arrow. They were no more strangers. They seemed to have known each other in some past incarnation. Leola thought, thrillingly, "Surely this is love that makes my heart beat so fast, and my cheeks burn under his glance, that holds my own so that I cannot look away. He is my fate." The young stranger was saying to himself quite as romantically, "Before I saw this exquisite creature I was madly in love with her shadow, and now that we have met, My heart is in her keeping forever. I owe her my very life, and I will be her true knight, and swear eternal fealty to my liege lady."
He reached out and caught her hand, saying deeply and tenderly,
"Forgive me if I seem too hasty, but something urges me on to confess my love before some unknown fate comes between us. Leola, am I too hasty, or may I hope to win your heart?"
The lashes fell against her blushing cheeks as she murmured, how strange that you have learned to love me like that, since only yesterday."
"I loved you weeks before I ever met you," was his startling reply, and as she cried out in wonder over that, he continued fondly, "A few weeks ago in New York, a young lady loaned me some negatives to copy. She had made them with her camera while out in the mountains last summer, she said. Among these negatives were such charming views of a young girl that I fell in love with the pictures as soon as I made them. I did not rest until I found out where the girl lived, her name, and, in short, all there was to learn about her. Then I took the train for West Virginia, and on arriving at Alderson I started out the same morning to find you, Leola, for of course you have guessed it was yourself. Directly my horse took fright, and only fancy my feelings when I saw you coming toward me on your white pony, a perfect vision of youth and joy and beauty, and realized that a horrible death might thrust us apart in another fatal moment. You saved my life, and can you wonder I look upon you as my fate, the fairest fate that ever life gave to a man?"
He paused, pressed the hand he held again ardently, and added musingly,
"How strangely everything has come about. I thought I should have to get acquainted with you in a very proper way, and go through a ceremonious courtship before I proposed, but fate took it all out of my hands. Now what have you to say to this, my dear girl? Will you let me hope to win your love?"
"It is yours already," Leola confessed with exquisite frankness. Then, as he rapturously kissed her trembling hand, she exclaimed, in wonder at herself, "Oh, perhaps you think I am too lightly won when I do not even know your name."
"That can be remedied very soon. Call me Ray Chester, an artist who wishes he were richer for your sweet sake."
"Then you are poor?" Leola questioned gravely.
"Do you regret it?" he asked sadly.
I don't know. Cousin Jessie always advised me never to marry poor. It is Jessie Sterling, I mean. She loaned you the negatives, did she not?"
"Yes, but I am sorry she put such notions in your pretty head. Perhaps you will take back your promise, learning I am poor."
"Oh, no, 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 never! I could not marry anyone without love, but Jessie says she would take a fright if he had $1,000,000. However, she has hooked, so she says, a big fish, rich and young and handsome too, and she wants, when she is married, for me to visit her so she can make a grand match for me."
"I will save her the trouble," said Ray Chester. "Love in a cottage will be our portion, my darling, but you are so lovely that I shall paint a picture of you that will perhaps make my fortune."
Suddenly a shadow clouded her lovely eyes. She had remembered for the first time her guardian's threat of yesterday.
"You look sad, Leola. Are you repenting your promise already?"
her lover cried anxiously. "I shall never repent. I believe you are my fate," the girl exclaimed earnestly, and to herself she thought, "I will not tell him of my guardian's foolish plans for wedding me to a rich man yet, for perhaps he will give it up after my frank refusal to obey him. No, I will not even think of it again. He cannot coerce me, for I will tell him I have already chosen my husband."
Accordingly, she helped out the romance all she could, by insisting on the girl's coming every day to help while away the invalid's lonely hours, saying cheerfully, "For you know that just as soon as Mr. Chester gets well enough to be going about, he will be right up at Wheatlands, paying back your visits 2 to 1. Thus encouraged, Leola came and went daily, making long visits without exciting any suspicion at home, for she was used to having her own way, and no one interfered with her liberty. It was quite a week that Ray Chester was detained at the cottage, for although he made light of his injuries, he was very much bruised, and felt stiff and sore, and the little gash on his temple was deep enough to take some time in healing,
and even then it would leave a scar under his thick brown curls that would always remain to remind him of lovely Leola's bravery in saving his life at the risk of her own. But that week went away so quickly, so happily, in that golden June weather, that when it was over they could not realize the lapse of days. "It seemed like one exquisite day," they said to each other. The program of their days had been something like this. Leola called every morning on Rex and remained until the midday meal at Wheatlands. After appearing at this hour she slipped away again, returning to the cottage and staying till she had to go home to supper. Her regularity at these meals warded off any suspicion that she spent the intervening hours in the company of a very charming young man, who would render all Wizard Herman's schemes to marry her off to her unknown suitor quite null and void. After supper, then, came the lonely time, for Leola had to remain at home and play to the governess on the piano in the dingy parlor, whose faded hangings had not been renovated for years. As this had been a yearly practice, she could not omit it without exciting wonder on the part of the spinster lady who had acted as her governess and companion since early childhood, and, now that school days were over, looked after the housekeeping, staying on indefinitely, not seeming to have either friends or suitors. Yet, although she was over 40 now, Miss Tuttle had not given over a scarcely concealed hope of marrying. As she was very thin and tall, her secret choice had fallen on her exact opposite, a neighboring widower about 50, who was rather short and very stout, and had recently come into a fortune by selling some valuable coal lands in Greenbrier County. Miss Tuttle, having been in love with neighbor Bennet when he was in moderate circumstances, only loved him the harder when he became so rich that he did not know how to spend his money. Some neighborly kindnesses he had certainly shown her, but not as many as she wished, and no amount of scheming had sufficed to bring him to the point of proposing. Thus absorbed in her own love affair, it was no wonder that Miss Tuttle paid small attention to Leola's comings and goings, regarding her still as a pretty child who had heretofore laughed at love and lovers. So there were none to molest the lovers and make them afraid, for Wizard Herman, though he did not give over his scheme, held his peace and went his way in cunning silence, giving Leola time to get over her fright. Even Dr. Barnes, who had not found it necessary to pay but 3 visits to his patient, did not know of the romance going on at the cottage, and being very busy with the measles, just then an epidemic in Alderson and the country round about, he had no time to gossip about the stranger whose life Leola Meade had saved. As there were none who knew Raychester, so there were none to worry over him, and beneath the matronly chaperonage of kind Widow Gray, their secret love bloomed into a splendid flower whose strong roots only death could tear away. "I love you, sweet, how can you ever learn how much I love you? You I love even so, and so I learn it. Sweet, you cannot know how fair you are. If fair enough to earn your love, so much is all my heart's concern. My love grows hourly, sweet. Mine too doth grow, yet love seemed full so many hours ago. The lovers speak till kisses claim their turn." "It cannot surely be a whole week. Was it not only yesterday?" cried the doting lover. But Leola counted off the days to him on her rosy fingers. "It was Tuesday when first we met. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and now it is Tuesday again. And I have been to see you twice every day, Ray. But tomorrow I cannot come at all, for there is a horrid picnic to which Miss Tuttle insists on taking me, and I cannot refuse lest she find me out."
"Why, then, I shall go to the picnic too. I adore picnics," cried Raychester.
"But you are not invited. It's a Sunday school picnic, you see, Ray, and you are not acquainted with anybody."
"I'll invite myself and get acquainted with everybody there in less than an hour," he answered gaily, and calling to Mrs. Gray, who was watering her geraniums in the yard, he said, "Aren't you going to the picnic tomorrow?" "Perhaps so, only I shall have to leave you a cold dinner," she said hesitatingly, coming up to the vine-wreathed porch in whose shadow the lovers were sitting. "I'll go with you if you let me," cried Ray, "and you will introduce me to everybody there as your new boarder."
and to Miss Tuttle in particular, and mind you show her much attention, Ray, for then she will ask you to Wheatlands," laughed Leola, falling into the spirit of the thing, for it came to her suddenly that by this means she and Ray could go on courting under her guardian's very nose without being suspected. "Miss Tuttle is so vain, she will easily think Ray is in love with her," she thought merrily, and so they all laid their plans for tomorrow. The picnic came off in a beautiful grove, and Widow Gray's new boarder kept his word and got acquainted with everybody there inside of an hour. He was specially gracious to the smiling Miss Tuttle, who herself presented him to Leola, saying, "Miss Mead, the little girl to whom I have been governess over 10 years." The little girl bowed demurely, and said she was glad to meet Miss Tuttle's friend, and then she turned carelessly away, and was particular not to interrupt his chat with the spinster until by his assiduity he got the coveted invitation to call. Chapter 6. Love's Entanglements. "Isn't he perfectly charming, Leola? As handsome as a picture, and the prettiest manners I ever saw. So courteous, so kind, altogether different from some of the country bumpkins around here, who don't seem to appreciate ladies as they ought. But really, for the life of me, I cannot tell which one of us he is courting, for he is so nice to us both. Sometimes I think it's you, and then, again, I may be the object of his affection. I cannot deny there may be a little disparity in our years, but I do not believe he would mind that. Do you, dear?" This was 2 weeks later than the picnic, from which it may be inferred that Ray Chester's courtship was progressing finely, without let or hindrance from Wizard Herman. Fortune had favored our daring hero, for Leola's guardian had been absent from the home nearly 2 weeks, and on returning he had resumed his laboratory work with such zeal that he remained quite in ignorance of the fact that a handsome young man, a stranger from the city, was a daily and welcome caller on the ladies of his family. His first news of the fact came from Mr. Bennet, his rich and rotund neighbor, who, perhaps growing jealous over Miss Tuttle, desired to know if Mr. Herman had any knowledge of the stranger's intentions. "In a word, sir, is the fellow sparking Miss Tuttle or Leola?" he said brusquely. Mr. Herman, startled, denied any knowledge of the young man. "I've been up to New York for some precious chemicals I required, and I was nearly 10 days absent. Since I've returned, I've been almost too busy to take time to eat or sleep, and I have not seen or heard of any young man," he declared. The sleek Bennet soon made him acquainted with the facts as he knew them himself. "The fellow's from the city, somewhere away off, good-looking and dandified, an artist he claims to be. He's boarding down at Widow Gray's, and showed himself first at a picnic where he came with her and got introduced to the whole countryside. I'm not saying he isn't as pleasant a young chap as I ever met, but I don't like it, seeing him in and out at Wheatlands all the time without knowing for sure who he's after, Herman," he concluded uneasily. "I'll look into the matter this very day and find out what's in the wind," was the reassuring reply. Bennet's little ferret eyes looked sharply at him, and he muttered, "I won't have any fooling over this here bargain. The mortgage falls due pretty soon now, and if you fail to keep your word, I'll foreclose at once, I swear." "I'll keep it to the letter, don't you be uneasy," soothed Wizard Herman, adding, "Have you done anything to help along your own cause, eh?" "I've called several times and fetched the girls presents of fruit and candy, and took 'em riding in my fine new turnout, but that dad-blamed dandy was always along, and I couldn't hardly get in a word edgewise to the girl. And Miss Tuttle, she done all the talking to me, so's I hadn't any show at all with Leola," Bennet muttered morosely. "Let's see. Suppose you write a letter and propose formally for her hand. Tell her how rich you are, and that you'll give her anything her heart craves. If she refuses, then I shall have to use my influence," Wizard Herman said consolingly, wishing he were well out of all this bother and back in his laboratory at work with his beloved chemicals. His house and lands were all mortgaged to his rich neighbor, and he had not a dollar to pay him to prevent foreclosure. It seemed like a providence when the rich widower cast his covetous eyes on lovely Leona, and offered, if Herman could get her to marry him, to release the debt. It was $15,000, but Wheatlands, with its wide-spreading acres, was worth twice as much, and it was terrible to thus sacrifice the home of his forefathers.
So Herman, who had burned up all that money in his foolish and mysterious experiments, decided that Leola must be sacrificed to pay the debt, since there was no other way. But how to obtain her consent he did not know, and since the morning when she had so angrily repulsed him, the subject had tacitly dropped between them, Herman realizing that his end could only be gained by force and cunning. Bennett's story about a possible rival put a new element of trouble into the affair, so he set himself to investigate matters by calling the governess to account. When he summoned her to the library, she thought he only wanted to go over some housekeeping accounts with her, or possibly to pay some arrears of her salary long overdue. Visions of a new gown and bonnet floated joyfully before her mind's eye, but she was soon undeceived. "Who and what of this young dandy who is making so free of my house these 2 weeks?" he demanded. Miss Tuttle bridled, and tried to blush like an 18-year-old girl. "Oh, Mr. Herman, the most charming young man. He's a boarder at Widow Gray's and is most attentive," she simpered. "So I have heard, but who is he after? Leola?" he demanded. "Oh, sir, no, indeed. That is, I cannot really be sure of his intentions towards either. He's so very charming to both of us we cannot decide between us which he prefers yet, but he does not seem like a flirt." "Amanda Tuttle, don't be an old fool. How do you suppose any young man could hesitate between an old woman like you and pretty Leola?" he replied brusquely. "Sir!" Miss Tuttle bridled, and tears came to her eyes. "Well, well, I spoke roughly, but you should not be so silly," returned her employer. "Remember, you were not very pretty when you first came here, and 15 years has changed you into a faded old maid." I hate you," she sobbed pitifully. "Hard words break no bones," he said carelessly. "If you will pay me my salary, I'll leave Wheatlands forever," she sobbed bitterly in her humiliation, but he went on coolly. "No, I don't want you to leave. I really need your services, Miss Tuttle, but as to whether you ever get that money I owe you depends on your own exertions. I've lost everything, and unless Leola makes a rich marriage I've planned for her, I will not have a roof over my head this day month." Miss Tuttle mopped her wet eyes with a little lace-edged handkerchief and straightened up, full of breathless curiosity. "Oh, who is he?" she exclaimed, and thereupon he suddenly confided his difficulties freely to her, hopeful of her ready cooperation of his life. On learning that the rotund widower Bennet, whom she secretly loved, was a suitor for Leola's hand, the spinster promptly went into hysterics that she could not have helped to save her life. She shrieked furiously, "Oh, the fat villain, the vile deceiver! After all his attentions to me since his poor wife died, to turn around and fall in love with a chit of a girl like Leola! Oh, I could tear him limb from limb, the wretch! And as to marrying him, she shall not! Never! Never!" "Oh, really, really," soothed her employer, but all to no purpose, for her heart being touched, she could not restrain her excitable feelings, but raved on angrily and tearfully for some time, until her emotion spent itself, the old man having bided his time to this end. He now observed sarcastically, "If you have done making a fool of yourself now, Amanda Tuttle, perhaps you will tell me what you are going to do about it. You cannot marry Bennet if he will not have you." "No," she moaned tearfully, and he continued coolly, "Perhaps you will bring suit for breach of promise." Miss Tuttle fairly tore her hair in humiliation. "Will you now?" he repeated. "No," she sobbed, suddenly realizing that she really had no grounds to base a legal action upon. She had built her hopes on a baseless fabric of neighborly politeness, nothing more, and her house of cards had tumbled to the ground. The revulsion from long hope to sudden despair was so bitter that it awakened an intense and jealous hatred of Leola, superseding the devotion of years. Herman realized that he had made a mistake in taking her into his confidence, and made a masterly retreat, exclaiming, "Oh, well, well, don't take it so hard, Amanda Tuttle. You're too old to behave like a lovesick chit. It isn't likely that Leola will want to marry him anyhow, and if she refuses, of course I must let old Bennet take the house and everything, and we can all go to the almshouse together." Chapter 7. Boast not thyself of tomorrow.
It was the bitterest hour of her life to poor Miss Tuttle. While she was talking to old Herman, she heard merry voices out of doors, and knew that Ray Chester had arrived and was sitting out in the rose arbor laughing and talking with beautiful Leola, who had turned out to be her rival when she thought her only a merry-hearted young girl. She wondered if it could be true, as her employer said, that no one would look at her twice when his lovely ward was by, and now she sadly remembered several little things that made her sure that his words were true. Sometimes, when the three went for long walks together, the younger pair would quite tire her out, but they would insist on going still further, leaving her waiting under some shady tree with a novel for an hour sometimes, while they hunted wildflowers or birds' nests, and their happy laughter would come ringing back as if they did not miss her in the least, as now she suddenly realized they did not. They only wanted her for an elderly chaperone. But somehow this did not hurt her as much as the seeming perfidy of widower Bennet, whom she loved with all her warm heart, and at whom she had been making tender eyes ever since his wife died a year or so ago. She had persuaded herself she would be the most proper wife he could find anywhere, and to find Leola preferred before herself was like the bitterness of death. She could not help envying and hating the lovely girl with the weakness of a shallow nature suddenly roused to bitter jealousy, and when she hurried away from Wizard Herman's presence to her own room, she was half resolved to pack her trunk and go away forever to hide her humiliation and grief. But while she bathed her stained face and smoothed her rather pretty brown hair, she reflected that she had nowhere to go, for all her relatives were dead, and she had no friends of any consequence. Poor soul, how she longed for a home and husband of her own! But the realization of her dream seemed further off than ever now, and as she stood at her window gulping down her piteous sobs, she heard again from the rose arbor the gay laughter of the lovers, and curiosity made her descend to them, wondering what had caused their mirth. Leola, as pretty as a flower in her white gown, had a letter in her hand, and she and Ray, with their heads very close, were laughing over it together. "Oh, Miss Tuttle, this is so ridiculous I have laughed till I cried," said Leola. "Only think, I have a lover, and he has made me a proposal of marriage."
"And," added Ray laughingly, "it is such a brilliant and desirable match that she is almost sorry she had promised to marry me before she received it."
"So you two are engaged?" cried Miss Tuttle, feeling the ground sink beneath her feet.
"Oh, yes, Miss Tuttle, and I know you are not surprised. Won't you congratulate us?"
cried Leola's handsome lover. "But please, please don't tell Uncle Herman, for I think I begin to see through his plans now, and he will never consent for me to marry a poor artist when I could marry his rich neighbor, old Mr. Bennet," laughed Leola. Poor Miss Tuttle gasped for breath, and sank helplessly on a garden chair, wishing she were dead and buried, so keen was her pain and humiliation. "You may read the old man's letter if you like," added the girl, thrusting it into her hand. The sorrowful spinster, who would have given all she possessed for such a letter, was forced to read the gushing and awkward love letter of the rich old widower to the merry girl, who laughed over it with her handsome young lover, and gaily passed around the fine box of bonbons that had accompanied the epistle. "The dear old silly! I thought he looked on me still as a little girl," she cried. "Now if he had only been sensible and asked you, Miss Tuttle, it would have been a charming arrangement in point of age and all that, you know." Miss Tuttle winced at the innocent thrust of the happy girl, but she was so miserable that her pride fell from her like a garment, and she frankly assented, saying, "Yes, for I always admired Mr. Bennet, and if he had asked me, I would have accepted him." The young people instantly felt very sorry and sympathetic, and Leola proposed that when she gave him her answer she should give him a hint that he would be more successful with the governess than with the pupil. Miss Tuttle was so moved by this offer that she felt all her anger and jealousy give way, and took Leola into her heart again. "Oh, if you could only manage it, I would be grateful forever," she exclaimed. "You know I cannot stay on at Wheatlands when you are gone, Leola, for people would talk. And besides the fact that he is in arrears for my salary, we have had a bitter quarrel this morning. and then, between tears and sobs, she blurted out all Wizard Herman's plans to the astonished lovers. Then Leola recalled the morning 3 weeks ago, when her guardian had bidden her prepare to be married in a month to the man of his choice. "So this is my rich suitor, old Bennet!" she burst out, laughing, for she could not regard it seriously at all, not realizing Wizard Herman's grim determination. "Why do you call him old? He is only about 50 or so, and a fine, handsome man," complained the tearful governess. She could hardly understand why the volatile Leola burst into spasms of the merriest laughter, in which Ray Chester could not help joining. Alas, they were so gay and happy, they were full of joy and laughter, little dreaming of the tragic moment near at hand, when tears would come more readily than smiles, and the dull ache at the heart would be like a piercing thorn. "If I were you, Leola, I would not feel so gay, for your guardian swears he will enforce his authority and have you marry Mr. Bennet willy-nilly," reproved Miss Tuttle anxiously. The girl looked gaily at her lover, and he caught her little hand in his, saying tenderly, "We aren't afraid of him, are we, my precious Leola? And if the worst comes to the worst, we will elope to Washington and get married before old Bennet knows what we are up to." "If you were only rich, there needn't be any trouble. You could pay off the mortgage for Mr. Herman, and then he would be willing enough for you to have Leola," suggested Miss Tuttle inquiringly. Ray's dark blue eyes looked questioningly into those of his bonny sweetheart. "Are you sorry I'm not rich? Would you rather have your old suitor?" he asked gently. "Nonsense! I'd take you without a coat to your back before I would have that old Falstaff with all his money," she answered laughingly, and they dismissed the thought of danger, for how could anyone force a girl to marry against her will? "But perhaps, after all, I had better see your guardian and ask him for his consent to our marriage?" questioned Ray. The governess shook her head. "No, do not anger him now, for he really is in such a rage he might set the dogs on you, who knows?" "Oh, very well, we need not hurry. It will all blow over by and by," cried Leola in her happy-go-lucky way, and presently, when Ray had taken leave, she went up to her room and penned an amiable but decided refusal of Mr. Bennet's offer, saying she would prefer to marry a younger man, and frankly advising him to turn his attention to Miss Tuttle, who admired him immensely and would make him the best wife in the world. When she showed this effort to the governess, the lady promptly hugged and kissed her, and declared she was the dearest girl on earth. A special messenger carried the missive over to the Bennet place, and Leola congratulated herself that the episode was closed. But who can tell what a day may bring forth? Leola's whole life had been carelessly happy, for she was blessed with one of those sweet, sunshiny natures that always look on the bright side and find pleasure in the simple joys of even a quiet life. She made her own sunshine as she went. For more than 3 weeks now she had been blissfully happy, so happy that in all her future she will look back in wonder that such perfect happiness could be, for alas, this was the end of those golden days of love's sweet dream. That night, at supper, Wizard Herman said casually, as if it were a matter of small moment, "Mrs. Sterling and Jessie will arrive on the early train tomorrow."